This voice thread has got two sections. The first one is on source documentation, and the second one will be on CRF completion guidelines. These are the overall lesson learning objectives. Source documentation is one of the primary responsibilities of the sites. So, as you know, the data generated in clinical trial starts from the source documents, and from the source documents, they are going to be transferred into the CRF and finally into the database. So, ensuring good quality of source documentation coupled with good quality of transfer of the data from the source document into the CRF is going to curtail many of the queries and discrepancies that are going to be generated downstream. So, as a site, you need to ensure good source documentation of your clinical trials. As you know, one of the essence of GCP is credible data, and hence, source documentation is an essential part of the quality assurance system. Correct, complete, current, and consistent information effectively meets a regulatory requirement, and this helps reduce the observation that could be raised as a result of inadequate documentation practices. Basically, source documentation will be practiced if we are following good documentation practice. And in good documentation practice, the ALQA principles have to be followed. And ALQA is an acronym which stands for A stands for attributable, L stands for legible, C stands for contemporaneous, O stands for original, and A stands for accurate. So in the subsequent slides, we'll look at on each characteristics individually. The first aspect of the ALQA principle to be discussed is the attributability. And what this means is that the data collected must be attributable to the person who has actually collected it. And this person has to be qualified by education, training, and also experience. So we're going to infer this from the CV of the staff. And the other aspect is that this person has to be also delegated in the site delegation form to perform the task. Again, we can look at the delegation form and confirm this. And finally, the person who has recorded the data has to date and sign or initial on the source document that he has done so. So when all those are fulfilled, then we say the data is attributable. The second aspect of the ALQA principle is legibility. And what this means is that the records in the source document we need to be able to read them. And as you know, records are very much critical for the study outcome and also patient safety. And if we cannot read them, we can't make much out of them. And hence, they should be read easily. And if corrections are necessary after the initial entry, what we can do in a paper source document is we can stroke a single line through the errors and initial and date them. The other aspect of the principle is contemporaneousness, and the data is assumed to be credible or contemporaneous only if recorded at the time of measurement or action taken. Otherwise, if there is a significant delay between the measurement or action taken and also recording, then there is a possibility for memory bias, and hence the data will be no longer credible. So our source document should clearly reflect the data was recorded at the time it was obtained, and we will be able to do that by indicating the time for the conduct or measurement and also the time for recording. The other aspect of the alpha principle is originality. The data in the source document has to be original or the first time that the observation is recorded. So the first time the data is recorded, then the medium becomes source document, and we are going for the original record or documentation because transcribing data presents a possibility of data entry or typing errors, which means with multiple transcribing, then errors are going to happen and the data is not going to be credible. But sometimes we may accept, we may deviate from this principle. One example is that certified copies or shadow copies of lab printout, from the lab machines, these shiny papers, the information on them easily fades, and hence we can make copy of this, and then we can sign and we can authenticate them and make them certified copies. Another issue is that the source documentation has to be accurate, the data has to be true and correct, and in conditions where there are multiple documents recording the same data, then these two documentations or more than two documentations, they have to be synchronized and they have to be in agreement with each other. Apart from the five principles we've mentioned, there are also additional principles such as completeness, consistency, enduring nature, and also available and also traceable. So all those aspects have to be fulfilled for our source documentation to be labeled as adequate. Now, after looking at all those types of requirements and characteristics of good documentation practice, we can look back at our source documents and we can ask ourselves whether our source documentation satisfies all those principles. If not, we need to think of a way to improve on those source documentation. The second part of the voice trail will be on CRF completion guidelines. As outline of this discussion, first we're going to look at the background, and then we'll discuss about the minimum requirements for CRF completion guidelines, and then we'll look at the content of the CRF completion guidelines. Then we'll look at the implementation of CRF completion guidelines, and finally we'll look at the outline of the guidelines. The main goal of CRFs is a consistent and accurate collection of data. On the other hand, CRF completion guidelines will give guidance on CRF completion, correction, and signing, and data handling, eventually ensuring the goal of CRFs. Problems in data collection may lead to inaccurate, unusable, or lost data, and the use of CRF completion guidelines could mitigate or avoid such problems. CRFs and associated instructions, such as CCGs, are critical in ensuring the quality of data. Assuring data quality starts early in a data collection process. As we've mentioned previously, the clinical trial data is transcribed for the first time in the source document, and having good source documentation will be very much important in ensuring the data quality. Following that, we need to transfer the data from the source document into the CRF, and accurate and complete transfer of this data from the source document to the CRF is going to be ensured by the CRF completion guidelines, and hence these guidelines are one of those early opportunities to improve the data quality. CCGs also provide field-specific instructions on how to complete the CRF fields, And benefits of the CCGs include increased data accuracy and consistency. They also increase traceability for decisions that are made during data collection. By doing that, they also decrease downstream work by reducing queries, monitoring findings, and audit findings. The CRF completion guidelines may include instructions such as diagnostic criteria and hence facilitating the correct inclusion and exclusion criteria. They also define terminologies used in the CRF and hence helping the form completers to understand the terminologies. They may also include specification of time points for observations, measurement methods, and also equipments, units, and precisions, as well as guidelines for handling variability, uncertainty, inconsistency, and error found in source documentation or during measurements. After discussing background information on the CRF completion guidelines, now we move to the minimum requirements for the guidelines. And the CRF completion guidelines, they should exist for every study and they should exist within the quality management system. The guidelines should specify not only on instructions on how to complete the forms, but also on how to make observation, measurement, abstraction from the source documents, and they should support the evaluation of the study conduct and also quality of data produced. The guidelines also should specify procedures for assuring ALQA compliance, and hence they are considered one of the essential documents. CRF completion guidelines are developed for use by the study personnel, and they are particularly used by site coordinators and monitors. Training is given on the guidelines and documented for roles involved in making observation, measurement, and also abstraction of data from the source document, as well as form completion. The guideline should be self-contained together with the CRF with no need for additional documents giving explanation on form completion. When we look at the possible content of CRF completion guidelines, we need to clearly state on the form the circumstances under which an item should be skipped. This is about blank spaces. Blank spaces are sometimes legitimate, but some other times they should have been filled, and that's an error. The second one is we need to provide instructions for recording missing data. So possible situations are that we might have asked the questions, but they are not answered, or probably they are not done or asked at all, and we have to indicate the situations. The other issue is we need to provide necessary definitions and instructions on the form just next to the item to which they apply. These kinds of approach will facilitate the understanding of the form completers and hence they are going to have a positive impact on the quality of data. We need also to provide explicit guidance as to the order of the day and month. As you know, sometimes we have got a date format where the day comes first, and some other times we have got a date format where the month comes first. So we need to explicitly indicate which one applies in that particular study. If calculations are required to inform immediate site action, we need to explain that clearly. Usually what we recommend is that we submit the raw data instead of the calculations. But if the sites are going to do some actions based on these calculations, it's recommended that they do the calculations on site. We need also to clearly state within the form's instruction the role of the individuals completing the form. So we need to indicate what is the physician's, research staff, patient, or their proxy roles. We need to provide the CRF completion guidelines to various roles, including data management, biostatistics, medical writing, and other clinical research team members, in order to familiarize them on how data are collected and recorded. We need also to establish metrics through which site performance on CRF completion will be assessed. This is just to see areas of improvement and continuously improve on the CRF completion process. A data manager or anyone with good knowledge on the protocol or the CRF could serve as the author of the CRF completion guidelines, but additionally, there is also a need collaboration with other roles, including collaboration with protocol author, clinical scientist, or a study physician who is familiar with the study objectives and therapeutic area. Also, a collaboration is required with a biostatistician with knowledge on the statistical analysis plan. We need also to collaborate with safety physician or medical monitor, and also collaboration with team members who are in regular contact with the sites is required. Finally, we need also to collaborate with those who are familiar with the study database system, data entry, or data processing. When we look at the outline of the CRF completion guidelines, the guidelines should be based on a specific protocol in CRF, and the guideline should also provide unambiguous instructions on the CRF completion for all practical scenarios. For example, when we encounter multiple data values or repeated assessments or data collected outside the study schedule, or data corrections or data resulting from unanticipated events. So in all those scenario, the guideline should guide us how to deal with these situations. The first one in the outline is identification of the data source. The guideline should identify the expected source for all study data, and there may be legitimate difference across sites, particularly in multi-site studies. And source document agreement or SDA is a document which is meant for indicating the source data for all the data to be collected in CRF, and probably can go back to your studies and check if you have got such document for your trials. Another aspect to be included in the outline is general conventions for form completion. There should be description of the expected data formats. For example, proper date formats to be expected should be defined in the general conventions. As we've discussed already, we have got different date formats, and this needs to be clarified. The other point is how to document partial dates. Partial dates are dates where we don't have the exact date, but you have got the month and the year, or sometimes the year. So occasionally it will be important to collect these partial dates, and clarification on how to do that is going to be included in the general conventions. The other aspect is blank for each digits for continuous measures, and also decimal places is going to be indicated. So what we mean here is that if you are expecting two digits figure, then you have to put two boxes or two blank spaces. Or if you have got one or two decimal places after the point, you have to also put the corresponding boxes. Clarification around rounding rules and abbreviations is also going to be included in the general conventions. Additionally, field definitions where field needs guidance to reduce ambiguity is going to be also included in the general conventions. Usually, we're going to use the help of screenshots for further clarification of the instructions. The general convention also should include instructions which are going to be used to call out linked data. What we mean by this is that, for example, if we have got an adverse event mentioned, and also if that adverse event talks of a drug given to the participant, then the CRF should prompt the form completers to enter concomitant medication in the concomitant medication section. The other aspect in the general conventions is that the form completers should ensure legible entry utilizing indelible ink, and also if there is a need for updating the entries or making corrections, then the guideline should indicate the proper way of doing it, which is drawing one line on the wrong entry, initial and dated. The other aspect of the outline is description of form structure and workflow. This is particularly true for electronic data capture studies. A section of the guidelines is going to be devoted on clarifying the ECRF dynamics and in the study design. For example, which ECRFs or modules are going to present when the subject is created, and what entry is required for additional modules or forms to populate. For example, there may be some modules not appearing for screen failures. So these types of description helps to ensure site personnel understand how to complete all of the expected entry. The other aspect of the outline is where to locate information in the medical record. Where in the chart the data that's needed for the CRF is located should be clearly indicated in the guidelines. Consideration should be given to the impact of time in such a way that the ones doing the medical record abstraction or extracting data from the medical record will not unnecessarily spend time on it. And consideration also should be given to the location in the record from which the information is to be extracted. For example, we can have a 5 versus 10 minutes APGAR score, and the CRF may require an APGAR score. So, which one to use as an APGAR score should be clearly indicated in the guidelines, or we may have a CRF looking for information on ejection fraction, and this ejection fraction could be measured from transesophageal or from transthoracic echocardiography. And which ones to use as ejection fraction should be again indicated in the guidelines. And again, if the CRF needs interpretation of an ECG, then this interpretation could be done by the machine or by physicians. And which ones again is going to be used as interpretation of the ECG should be clearly indicated in the guidelines. Additionally, the guideline should also outline field-specific instructions for form completion. We need to define terms such as low grade, mild, moderate, high, severe, or significant. And such classifications should be validated by calculation of inter-rater reliability. We need also to include instructions for how to handle missing data. We need also to highlight forms requiring investigator signature. Generally, for electronic CRF, all the modules need to be signed by the investigator. In the case of paper CRF, the investigator should sign at the end of each CRF. But anyhow, the specific procedure should be also indicated in the guidelines. And finally, contact information should be included in the guidelines just in case somebody will have a question on the CRF completion guidelines.